listening to the Good Roads podcast, where we dive into the issues shaping municipal transportation and infrastructure in Ontario. I'm Thomas Barakat, and I'm joined by my co-host, Good Roads' Andrew Blackburn. We're thrilled to welcome a passionate advocate for safer streets and stronger communities, Eleanor McMahon. Eleanor is the founder of the Share the Road Cycling Coalition and a former Ontario cabinet minister, where she championed policies that put active transportation and road safety at the forefront. Her leadership has helped shape a more bike-friendly Ontario, and her voice continues to be a powerful one in the movement for healthier, more connected communities. Eleanor, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me. So excited for this conversation.
Great. So why don't we just start at the beginning here? Can you tell us about the journey that led you to start the Share the Road Cycling Coalition?
Absolutely. So my late husband, Greg Staubard, who was an OPP sergeant and spent his 25-year career with the OPP, was tragically killed in 2006 by a motorist who pulled up to pass him on a two-lane road. Greg was on a training ride on his bicycle. We had just purchased his new bike and quite excited to be out on the road. And unfortunately, the gentleman who killed him on that one-lane road pulled out to pass, unfortunately going uphill, found himself in faced with an oncoming series of vehicles, moved his car sharply to the right to avoid a head-on collision and killed my husband. So that tragic loss, especially someone who'd spent his career advocating for safer roads and as a sergeant in the OPP, and as his wife, virtually every day he would come home with stories of someone who he encountered who had done something egregious and committed some kind of violation, because that's the life of a police officer on the road. In his memory and in his spirit, decided that this tragic loss, completely preventable, of a great guy who was loved by so many people, including me, of course, said, listen, we have to do something to memorialize Greg's legacy, but also importantly to ensure that this happens to fewer and fewer people because the loss was so egregious and preventable. And what can we do in his memory to really ensure that Ontario has safer roads for cyclists, and that we can raise the awareness of all of that. And so in that spirit, after he was killed, shortly afterwards, I began a journey of really research and discovery. And I spent close to a year traveling the United States and bicycle-friendly jurisdictions. I went to Europe. My city, Burlington, is twinned with Apeldoorn in Holland, a famously cycling mecca, as we know the Netherlands to be, to learn from people there, legislators, cyclists, ordinary people. How did we create the kind of cycling society that we have in Europe? And how can we benefit from that? And of course, closer to home in the United States, where cities like New York, we're transforming under the leadership of a Republican mayor, by the way. Bloomberg did more for cycling in Toronto, if we want to talk about ideology, than pretty much every mayor since, although that progress continues. And so learning along the way about how other places in the world made their societies more bicycle friendly. What is the secret sauce? What are the critical ingredients? And then after about close to a year on the road, and much of it in Ontario as well, launched the Share the Road Cycling Coalition on the basis that people said to me and to us, we need an organization that really galvanizes all of the civil society in Ontario that wants our roads to be safer. So cycling advocates, yes. Mayors and councillors, 100%. Private sector leaders who were hoping to generate tourism income and economic development potential from cycling tourism, and began to build the ethos for an organization, and which we launched in 2007. So did all the things that good non-for-profits do, got a board together, hired staff, raised money, and began to look at some evidence-based approaches to bringing some sanity, if you will, and some changing of the narrative around cycling, and that journey continues. I'm now chair of the board of the organization that I launched in Greg's memory, and we have a track record of success that's pretty enviable. So grateful to have
So,
had this
w-
chance.
yeah. So why don't you talk to us a bit about that in the sense that what's changed since 2007? So since Share the Road's founding, how much progress have we made in that time over the past 18 years or so?
Wow, it's 18 years. It is, isn't it? When you think about it, it's been almost 2 decades. I think we saw steady progress in the early going for sure. As we began to mobilize and give voice to municipal leaders, mayors, councillors, folks that were just really looking for a champion that could lead them and give them support. I started spending time at your conference. I started going to AMO and talking to mayors and basically having those conversations. If you build this, will you come? And they said yes. So what's changed? Well, we did give voice to a movement that began to take shape pretty quickly, and that was very edifying and gratifying, but it also created a lot of momentum. We also started meeting with officials at Queen's Park to really look at what are the ministries in government, MTO, of course, municipal affairs and housing, health, that really we should be leaning into. Began to do some research, and then in 2009, we had an important breakthrough when we launched our first Ontario Bike Summit. It'll be 18 years now, or gosh, not quite 18. Sorry, my math is terrible, apparently. 16 years, where our Ontario Bike Summit is in Windsor this year at the end of May. And that was the first gathering in Waterloo in 2009, where the mayor, who I met at AMO, invited me to come to Waterloo, an innovative place, to bring together municipalities. The Minister of Transportation actually came to our conference, which was a breakthrough because people said, oh, well, the province isn't interested. And I'd been hearing along the way, oh, no, yeah, we don't do bikes here, said a fellow at MTO to me at one point, not to pick on MTO, but that actually conversation actually happened. And I said, really, watch me. So, so we began to build the impetus for public policy change, systemic change in Ontario. And so major outcomes after our first bike summit, the first Ontario cycling strategy framework in over 20 years. We launched a white paper on Ontario Bikes, Ontario Benefits that looked at evidence-based approaches to cycling and gave the Ontario government a menu. I then met Kathleen Wynne, who was transportation minister, and that conversation started and continued. And then in 2012, we called for a coroner's review into cycling deaths, which was another step along the journey that was really important. Why? There were 14 recommendations in that coroner's review. It was a multi-stakeholder environment, as coroner's reviews are, including the police, CAA, organizations like ours, and others. We were the only NGO on the panel. And the 14 recommendations that came out of that included a bona fide Ontario cycling strategy that encompasses the whole of government. So, another major milestone the next year was the development of a new cycling strategy for the province, which was launched in 2013. And that became the basis for public policy change. Glenn Murray was Minister of Transportation then. We worked steadily together to really take all of the energy and the momentum at the municipal level that we had been building for several years, bring it to the forefront, and launch a strategy that encompassed 12 government ministries in Ontario to say this is what cycling looks like in Ontario, this is what it should look like, and this is how we're going to get there together, and this is how, as a government, we're going to move this forward. So that really became an important strategic imperative for the government of Ontario, and the first time began to look at options for moving things forward, like investments in infrastructure, like changing the conversation, like active and safe routes to school, and so on. So those are kind of some of the major milestones that Share the Road engineered. If I may, one final thing. In 2008, I went to the Minister of Transportation because the fellow who killed my husband had 5 convictions for driving under suspension, 4 convictions for driving with no license, $15,000 in unpaid fines, and 2 months after he killed my husband, he hit someone else. So, with a rather egregious driving record, on that basis, I went to the commissioner of the OPP and made a business case for changing legislation in Ontario to really crack down on people who habitually drive under suspension, because at that time there were I forget the number now, forgive me, a significant number of Ontarians that were under suspension, and we noted that three-quarters of them were still driving. So with that, as you both know, if you drive under suspension in Ontario, you have no insurance, and that's just the basic tenet of, never mind the moral arguments around, if you're under suspension you should not be driving. The province takes your license for a reason. You should leave your car in the driveway or in your garage and not use it for that period of time. So yet the fellow who killed Greg had done that several times. So how do we discourage that? Legislation. So Greg's law in 2009, and then we did the 1 meter safe passing law, which Share the Road advocated for, and that passed in 2015 after I was elected MPP for Burlington in 2014. So there you
All
go.
right.
So the highlights of our work along the way.
A lot there.
Lots there, yeah. Lots there.
All right. So, well, that brings us. Well, I mean, not up to exactly today, but I think that can serve as the segue to bring us today. So what?
Sure.
Where are we today? What's the state of cycling in Ontario in 2025 after all the work that you've been doing?
I guess I'd say two things. Share the Road is an evidence-based organization. So in about 2008, we started doing public polling. If I may just lead up to your response with some
Yeah.
background, because it's a relevant question. The journey continues. In 2008, the conversation about cycling, it became really polarized when the mayor of Toronto started talking about there's a war on the car, and it really started to take root and became a really it was a harmful, for those of us who'd lost loved ones in cycling tragedies like me. It's actually a very hurtful thing for him to say, and it wasn't helpful. And my Irish personality responded to that by saying, "Yeah, I don't believe that. It's not by pointing fingers that we're going to resolve these issues, but by working together." And so we started at Share the Road. We started doing public polling. And what's interesting to your point about what's different is that the same statistic emerged in our last public polling in Ontario on cycling in 2023. 87% of Ontarians are cyclists and motorists. Every day, people in their daily journeys, whether they use transit or as a growing number of them in Ontario do every day, I'll get to that in a moment, take their bike. Maybe they ride their bike to the subway or the GO train and carry on from there, as many European cities do. They give people options that are cheap and fast and easy.
Right.
And that's what we need more of. And so what's changed is there's more people riding than they were when we started public polling, by far.
Huh.
The current
Mhm.
estimate
Are there any stats that reflect that?
3.2 million people are riding their bikes at least daily or weekly in Ontario.
Mhm.
Wow.
And that is a significant number. And we know that 68% of Ontarians overall ride their bike on a regular basis. If you broaden that out, that includes a monthly stat where people choose to ride their bike. The number one reason people don't ride, they feel unsafe. The
Mhm.
number
I can
one
definitely
reason,
attest to that.
right? The number one reason people, what gets them on their bikes? Investment in infrastructure. So
Mhm.
Share the Road's journey was about advocating for investments in infrastructure. When I ran in 2014 and then got into cabinet, the premier handed me the cycling file, which allowed me to make announcements like the kind of record investment in cycling infrastructure that we haven't seen since, 125 million for municipal infrastructure that went 25 million alone to the city of Toronto and elsewhere. So cities around the province benefited from a provincial government that said cycling is a priority, and we're going to make it work for municipalities, and we're going to make the roads safer for everyone, because we know that motorists like evidence to the contrary or thought to the contrary. Motorists like are cyclists too, as the data points out, but they also want safe places and predictable places where they can see cyclists. There's a dedicated lane. They're there. They're safe, right? I mean, we've all seen this, and
Exactly. Yeah.
it's human nature. So don't polarize. Look at solutions and make them happen, and that's what policy leaders should be doing rather than polarizing.
Hmm.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think at the end of the day, everybody benefits when if more people can
Mm,
cycle, for example, you have
mm,
less congestion, not more
mm. That's
congestion, and making sure that people feel safe is probably the number one thing that can help. And I know that in some of the polling, I think that you had done with Crestview Strategy, or that Share the Order done with Crestview Strategy, I think one of the numbers I saw was that 83% of Ontarians wanted to cycle more, but I guess like there maybe it's that fear that you mentioned. I guess was that surprising to you at all? 83% of people wanted to cycle more.
I love that figure because I think it really punches through what can sometimes be a vocal minority of people who say, no, bike lanes cause congestion, no more of that. When you really step back and think about it, and I know these arguments aren't always rational, but this is very personal for me, obviously, because when my husband was riding his bike that day, there was no bike lane on that road. He was hugging this little white line on the side of the road. There was no paved shoulder, by the way. And he was on that 2 lane road, as so many Ontarians are. By the way, that road where he was riding, I lobbied the region, and thank goodness for Gary Carr, the regional chair. That road now, Tremaine, where Greg was killed, is now
Hmm.
full bike lanes. There's a multi-use path on the side. So to your point
Wow.
about that 83% figure, people want places to ride.
Yeah.
Without them, they're not going to feel safe. And what do they hear in the narrative all the time? Cycling is unsafe. It's scary. You're going to
Yeah.
die.
Hmm.
Like it's
Yeah.
really that does that attract people to ride their bikes more often? Not really. Does it get parents saying, "Wow, I want my kids to ride to school," as we did when we were young? And that isn't happening either. Even though the distance in the GTA or the GTHA, by the way, the average distance to school is under 2 kilometers. So it's that kind of narrative needs to change. So yeah, I love that number, that 83% number, because it speaks to the pent up demand that definitely exists in Ontario for people to ride more.
Yeah, and then when you look at the demographics, it's like when you're looking at growing to that 83%, it's a lot of the more vulnerable people. It's like the gender divide and the older bikers who just like
100%.
they look at the infrastructure available and they're just like, I'm not going to risk it.
You know,
Yeah.
Um,
it's so true, right? Traffic calm neighborhoods, no matter where we live, and this is definitely the case in Europe. And it's really interesting. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but if you're just having dinner with friends and you're talking about vacation plans, people talk about Europe, for example, or even, I mean, I'm in New York often, less so these days, by the way. But one of my best friends works at the UN, and so I love going to New York. And that city has been transformed by cycling, by the way. Oh gosh, people are still getting up every day and going to work. Wow, who'd have thought it? Um, but when people talk about Europe, what do they love about it, right? Just think about your own conversations with your friends and what you
Yeah.
love, right? Wow, I love the cafes. I love the streets where there are no cars and people are walking and
Yeah.
with their kids and shopping and eating on a lovely patio. And
Yeah.
I saw this at Leipzig, Germany, when I was there for the Global Cycling Conference a few years ago. They completely shut down. There's no access to vehicles in the downtown core in Leipzig, Germany. And the growing number of cities are doing that. Brussels is the same. They're just getting away from, single occupancy vehicle and giving people options to travel because cycling is the fastest, cheapest thing around, right?
yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that's, I feel like that's the biggest roadblock because, like, we're talking about polarization, and I think it
Yes.
runs deep in North America, where there's always like this cyclist versus car dichotomy,
Yes.
Lanrick Bennett, our good friend,
Yes.
there. Sorry, yeah, the former bike mayor.
He's a friend
I
of
think he
mine.
just posted. Yeah, he just posted, and he was like, "Why are you thinking of this person on the bike as a cyclist? This is a person. This is just another person. He could be a pedestrian. He could be another motorist. It's just there's no difference between you and him. You just want to be safe on the road. But
Yeah,
that cultural aspect where we're always having this battle is very strange to me in North America,
Yeah.
and I always
it
see
is
it as like,
always strange.
how do we defeat this? How do we change that? It's kind of funny. It's a little different. I'm originally from Calgary, which is even less bike friendly than Toronto, and I remember moving here in 2014, getting out on the road, and even just like that shift to Toronto where there's more cyclists is like, I remember the first time a cab waved me in to pass, and I was just like, oh, that's so nice. Never happened to me in Calgary. uh, so these incremental changes, like I feel like we've hit a plateau in Toronto, and things are sort of going against us.
Yeah, it's that's why organizations, if I may say, like Share the Road are really important because we're
Mhm.
a civil society organization that acts in a nonpartisan way to really change the narrative and put information in front of people that says, it doesn't have to be, it's not, first of all, it's not you versus me. It's
Mhm.
us. We are in this together. When I think of most people and they get up and go about their business every day, I like to think and I believe that people don't get up and say, wow, I'm going to go out and injure a vulnerable road user today, a cyclist or pedestrian. That's my goal. That's what I want to do, right? No, most people are thinking about their daily journey and that they thought about it the night before, likely, because they likely have busy mornings, as we all
Yeah.
do. And they're thinking about their daily trip. And what are they thinking about? I have to get to my meeting. And if they're going to Toronto, for example, where we know that congestion is an ongoing issue, okay, I'm going to take the GO train and then the subway. And how am I going to get? They're not thinking about purposefully hurting people. They are frustrated by delays, that they are so angry sometimes that they can't get from A to B. But what's really interesting, and I'm that person who gets into an Uber occasionally and talks to Uber drivers because they're the ones that are really on the road more often than anyone, it seems to me. And I ask them things like, hey, how do you feel about bike lanes? How do you feel about this? And I haven't met an Uber driver yet that doesn't think that bike lanes are important because they feel secure knowing that the cyclist is there and that gives them a predictable lane to be in. And I've even had conversations with them about this idea that bike lanes cause congestion. I mean, they really don't. And studies around the world have proven that there isn't an
Right.
ounce of evidence that say that bike lanes cause congestion, as I like to say. The bike in front of you or beside you is the car that isn't. And isn't that better for everybody?
Exactly.
Mhm. Exactly.
I don't know. I think we have work to do to change this narrative and change minds and hearts still. And when we give voice to this idea that cyclists don't matter because they're people, and we depersonalize and dehumanize
Yeah.
our discussions, it doesn't help mayors and councillors who really are trying to punch through some of that misinformation. And it's really easy to point at cyclists and not only dehumanize them, but think of them as a lobby group or an interest group when, my God, all they're trying to do is be healthy, save time,
Mhm.
save money,
Yeah.
which, by the way, right now, everybody is focused on as we're looking at a possible recessionary environment and rising
Mhm.
costs. I think, and when I think of my nieces and nephews who live in Toronto, not one of whom owns a car, by the way,
Mhm.
they don't own a car because it's expensive and they have other costs. They all bike,
Yeah.
they all take
Yeah.
transit, right? And
Yeah.
and if I lived in Toronto, I would do the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you want to keep on the whole trend of buying Canadian, most of our oil comes from the States. We were just looking at these statistics. Ontario oil is mostly American oil. So,
Yes.
hey, if you if you want to buy Canadian, what better way than to either bike or take public transit in Canada right now?
It's so true. I think getting at what that makes me think of is myth busting. And a lot of what Share the Road has done over the years, and we're really getting back to this place, is myth busting. The idea that bikes cause congestion. False, by the way. No research exists. I won't dwell on it today, but the current court case that's been in the news that we won't touch on here, but nonetheless, the Ontario government has engaged in a court case that's been brought against them. It has been laid bare that the decision that they made recently around legislation was not evidence based. I think all of us just want our politicians to make thoughtful, evidence based decisions that save lives and actually focus not on political solutions, but ones that are rooted in actually solving problems, because that too deepens the ideology. Cycling should never be a partisan issue. It's why Share the Road has an all-party cycling caucus. We have since
Hmm.
2012. I brought it back when I led Share the Road. I brought it back. I was in the UK, a little bit of R&D, rip off and duplicate from our friends in the UK Houses of Parliament, where they have an all-party caucus there that brings together MPs from all sides of the House to say, how can we focus on solutions that are driven not by partisanship, not by
Hmm.
knee-jerk polarizing solutions, but by evidence-based, thoughtful, that are people-centered? Because more people want to ride. People are ahead of politicians on this, way ahead. And as a former legislator, I saw that all the time. People are
Hmm.
often ahead of their politicians. So let's do what the majority of people want, which is make our roads safer, more predictable. And by the way, anti-congestion, because bikes don't cause congestion. In fact, they alleviate it, and they say it with no time of feeling.
Yeah. Well, so I was looking at some old stuff. When I first moved here, like I said, in 2014, I did my master's here, and I remember consulting a Pembina Institute paper on the state of infrastructure, and they had certain miles and certain usage, and it's very interesting looking at like the city of Toronto stats that they just released last year, and the bike share usage, which is
Through the roof.
skyrocketing.
Yeah, through the roof.
And it's kind of interesting looking at that stats because they have essentially doubled the kilometers since 2015, just in the city of Toronto alone. So we've made all this progress. We've built all this infrastructure. So
Yes,
I think it's just like,
exactly.
how do we engage with the decision makers right now from an advocacy perspective? Like, how do we
I,
grow the cycling infrastructure from where it is right now?
I think I think it's more that myth busting. It's such a great question, Andrew. I think at our Ontario Bike Summit at the end of May, we have two really important discussions. They're all going to be great, but two that I'm excited about. One is a panel of um, uh, municipal leaders who are going to talk about the potential and potentially some of the issues that confront us now. We have on our board a councillor in the city of Waterloo who happens to be an engineer and a vibrant cycling advocate in her community. Waterloo is one of our bicycle friendly communities that share the road. We do have a program that awards cities for progress and potential and gives them feedback on how they can improve. And Diane Freeman, who's the counselor I'm speaking of, is going to moderate a discussion amongst municipal leaders because they matter. They're the ones that are really confronted with when the rubber hits the road, pardon the pun. And their cities, people just want cities to work and they want them to work better. They want our roads to work better. Don't need to tell you guys that. They want us as policy thought leaders and all the policymakers to come up with these thoughtful solutions. So I would say that our task ahead is continuing to beat the drum of cycling's potential, the growing number of people that want to cycle. Those are real people.
Hmm.
You can't say that they're an interest group when 3.2 million people are riding their bikes every day across this province, and that number continues to grow. And in a lot of those places, by the way, there aren't necessarily bike lanes. So even when you take bike lanes away, or on secondary streets or whatever, people are going to continue to ride their bikes because they want to, because in places like Toronto, I don't want to perseverate too much on Toronto, but in many places in our province, uh,
Yep.
Ottawa, for example, our larger tier one municipalities, cycling is the fastest and cheapest way to get around. If I may, I'll share a story from back in the day. I met Bill Peduto, who's the former mayor of Pittsburgh, when I was at the National Bike Summit in Washington. Our organization models itself after the League of American Bicyclists, which is a outstanding national organization the states that's built in DC. I went to their bike summit every year, and I've spoken. I couldn't go this year, unfortunately. I really wanted to go, but I couldn't. But it is a model organization in terms of how they deal with Congress and build champions, and which is exactly what we do at Share the Road. And I remember Bill Peduto coming to the Bike Summit and saying in front of this national audience, listen, he had just, and he was so proud and good, which is good reason for him to be proud. Google had just decided to invest heavily in Pittsburgh and was bringing one of their head offices or one of their, uh, um, head office, one of their branch offices to Pittsburgh. And as you know, Pittsburgh was a steel town. It's still a steel town, but it's really a high tech mecca now and a healthcare center. And Bill sat down with the CEO and he told the story of Google, who said, "I will bring jobs here, but here's what I need from you. I need transit related development. I need a bicycle friendly environment because my people, my workers, don't drive." And we're seeing this, by the way, as records numbers of people are driving less, either for costs or other
Right.
reasons. The Economist did a great study on this recently. He said, "Our people at Google are not drivers. They are not motorists. They want to live close to work. They work long hours, and they want transit-related development and bicycle-friendly streets. So, can you do that?" So, talk about an imperative to do more. By the way, I think he'd be okay with me sharing this, but when John Tory was running to be mayor, he and I've known each other for many years, and I had breakfast with him, and I cited that story. I also talked about the mayor of Chicago at the time, who was Obama's chief of staff, who said, I'm going to make it my mandate to draw rings around every neighborhood in Chicago, and I want a 5-mile radius as people think about transit and daily trips, and I want those to be bikeable. So when you have cities like Pittsburgh and Chicago, DC and New York, and San Francisco, even Los Angeles now, making record investments in cycling, that becomes a competitive advantage for mayors here. And John Tory really got that. I said to him, he's going to kill me for sharing this, but it's okay. We've been friends a long time. I said to him, "I don't need you to be a Lycra guy. That's not what I'm talking about here. I need you to be who you are, which is a guy who cares about competitive advantages, understanding that Toronto is a global city, the biggest city in this country, and it's competing for jobs with other cities around the world. And when you think about drawing employers and inviting them to invest here, that's the kind of worker that we're talking about because they are driving less." And he really got that. And I think that's what you're seeing in cities around the world, and why. And I'll see this. I'm heading to Poland at the invitation of the European Cyclist Federations to speak on a panel about exactly what we're talking about today, where cycling is going. It's going up. What are some of the important imperatives in front of us? By the way, our friends in the United States are looking at really the dismantling of many of their government agencies with dismay and concern. And my cycling friends in particular, who work in senior levels in public policy in the US government. So this is a worldwide phenomenon. How can we work together to break through? And I welcome the conversation, just like I do today, to talk about the fact that more people want to ride their bikes more often. It's so beneficial to their health and well-being, to their cost of living, to congestion mitigation, that it is in our direct interest to invest in more cycling infrastructure, not less. And these are the drums that we need to keep beating, to answer your question. Sorry, Andrew, that was a long answer, but not surprisingly, it's a topic I'm passionate about.
Of course.
So,
Well, there's all sorts of historical context to cover, and
Yeah, for sure.
so
For sure.
Eleanor, in that response, and I think in a few others, and you mentioned it too, like a lot of it's kind of focused on Toronto and the GTA,
Mhm.
GTHA. A lot of our listeners are actually from outside of the GTA,
Of course.
rural Ontario, Northern Ontario.
Of course.
How does how does this conversation kind of affect them? They might not be worried about congestion. Like, what does it look like? What are the benefits to having better cycling, more cycling, better cycling infrastructure in some of these more rural and northern areas?
I love that question, and it's such an important one. I'll speak personally for a moment. Because my husband was an OPP officer, we lived in small town Ontario, so I know what it's like to live in a small town. I lived in Eganville, and Greg was an OPP officer in Killaloe, which is the detachment where Eganville is part of the detachment area, and 200 square kilometers, very big detachment. But we lived in a town of 1,100 people. And I grew up in Windsor, which is not a small town, but is on the, it's not a tier one. It's a mid-sized city. It was smaller when I was growing up, of course, all those years ago. But it's important to think about those small municipalities for a couple of reasons. It still applies that cycling, because in Canada, by the way, this is an Environment Canada statistic, 40% of our trips in Canada are under 10 kilometers. So think about that for a second. That encompasses places like Eganville, where 10 kilometers gets you way past the city limits, by the way. It's a small place. I loved living there. It was wonderful. It taught me a lot about small town living, and I've carried that with me to this day. But tourism is a big part of the economy in the Ottawa Valley. And encouraging cycling tourism, whose economic benefits are well established, is something that Ontario has been interested in now. And I'm happy to say Share the Road's been on this for many, many years. I'll say, too, on a personal note, that when I was tourism minister, I launched the first Ontario cycling tourism framework that sought to build on the desire of municipal leaders to invest in cycling and then to leverage it for its economic potential. Our bike summit in Windsor this year, one of the reasons we chose Windsor in Essex County is because there's a robust wine region in Essex County. Many of those municipalities, and there are 7 of them, have invested heavily in cycling tourism, and it's paying off. Tourism Windsor, Essex, Pelee Island, who's our lead sponsor at the summit this year, is really showcasing cycling tourism, which is on the rise. And although tensions with the United States are in evidence, in my former life as the CEO of the Trans-Canada Trail, I announced with the City of Windsor and with colleagues in the United States a binational trails tourism organization to leverage the potential of the bike lanes on the new Gordie Howe Bridge that are going to carry tourists from Canada and from Essex County to the US, because Detroit, by the way, is being revitalized. We could do a whole issue on how Detroit is being remade and how cycling is figuring prominently in what they are doing there. It's incredibly exciting for economic development, potential reasons, all of that. Detroit's being remade. So how do we connect our tourists to them? And how do we invite them over the bridge? And Share the Road advocated for those lanes back in 2012 successfully. So how do we bring people all over the bridge like they do in San Francisco, by the way? Anyone who's been on the Golden Gate Bridge and cycled it, I have. You can go back and forth as a commuter and as a tourist every single day. So the exciting potential for cycling tourism in small towns. There is an Ontario cycling strategy that still has some momentum within the MTO and through organizations like the Waterfront Regeneration Trust. So what I would say to small towns is cycling is important. You have traffic calm roads, places like Stratford, for example, who get very busy in the summer. Investing in cycling is good for your residents. It's great for tourism. And it enhances the health and well-being of your community, but it also gets people shopping more. Lots of data on how people, when they're on their bikes, spend more than folks who are driving, because whether they take home that TV set that day on their bicycle. And by the way, I've seen that it does happen, because how do they do it in Europe? They can go to a store. They don't have to worry about meter running. They've got their bike outside. They can leisurely have a conversation. They can be in the store and not, I guess I say, worry about the parking. Oh my gosh, it's 4 o'clock. I got to move my car because I'm on a main road. They don't have to worry about any of that. How great. You live in a small town. You should be encouraging cycling. It's to your economic benefit to do so.
Never really made that connection, because like I know all the BIAs. We always hear about the stories about the BIAs who are against a bike lane here and there, and then they found out that, oh wait, cyclists spend more money because it's just easier to get into my store. They don't have to find
Easier to
parking
get
and
into
stuff
my
like that.
store.
So
Saw that on the
that
Danforth, by the way. Saw it on the Danforth, where for years the BIA was against it. Fear is a powerful motivator. And when people are frightened, it's usually because they haven't had another perspective. Isn't that true at a human level? If you're afraid about something and someone says, don't be afraid, let me tell you how this actually works. You're like, oh, Oh, I didn't even think about that because
Yeah.
I'm too busy being afraid of what the Armageddon that I have decided is going to happen if bike lanes arrive at my door. Wait a second. By the way, remember the data that came from the city of Toronto when, I hate to say it, the bike lanes on Bloor were installed. They did a data with Moneris and they looked at shopping
Yes.
patterns, and it was overwhelmingly the case that shopping went up after the bike lanes went in. Oh, what a shocker. People actually stopped in a traffic calm, human centered environment, and they had the luxury of stopping and shopping and, by the way, spending.
Yeah.
So,
So
actually,
great for the local economy, and it's really interesting to know that's portable to the rural communities in these
it
main
really
streets
is.
like
It
that.
really, really is. Some of the best cycling towns in the United States, even that I have visited, are cycling jurisdictions. There are islands in the United States, but like Mackinac Island, for example, where there are no cars, only bikes.
Right.
Non, it's a really interesting phenomenon. I believe it's Mackinac Island. Oh, I'm going to get in trouble if that's not
I
right.
think no, I think it is Mackinac. Yeah,
I
in
think it is
Michigan, right?
Mackinac
Yeah.
Island and upper in the
Yeah.
Upper Peninsula.
Yeah.
As a Windsor girl, Mackinac is like a familiar thing to me. But there are the Chichimon ferry that goes to oh gosh, I'm having a seniors moment. The island of in Lake Huron that I know and can't remember takes bikes now, so you can, and there are bike
Hmm.
lanes on the island, so you can take
Huh.
your you can go to the upper to the Bruce Trail, and you can take your bicycle, put it on the ferry, and then Manitoulin. Thank you, I knew it was in there. Manitoulin Island has cycling infrastructure, and you can take your bike on the ferry, up north. So
Oh,
the
wow.
last thing I would say to our friends in rural Ontario and smaller areas is this: that Share the Road is working with a group of MPPs now to table a private members bill to make paved shoulders mandatory when highways are invested in over the long term. Why? Well, think about your driveway. If you had a gravel driveway, you'd be replacing it every couple of years. No one does that, by the way. I've never seen a gravel driveway. Oh, that's not true. You see them in smaller communities and rural communities. My cottage has a gravel driveway. What am I saying? In a very rural area. But you don't see them much in the city, is my point.
Right.
And the reason for that is because they're unsustainable and messy, and they don't last. So paving shoulders is really good for the cycling tourism economy. We've paved the shoulders of Highway 6 to great benefit to that part of Ontario where cyclists can feel free to, again, go up to the Chichimon and away you go to Manitoulin. But it's a bigger upfront cost to pave versus gravel. However, the trucking industry really likes it and it's safer for vehicles, by the way. When you're married to a cop, one of the things that you take away are the stories about how to avoid certain driving behaviors. And my husband always said to me, if you're on the road and you've got a gravel shoulder next to you, and somehow you're forced off the road or something happens untoward where you have to go onto the shoulder, slow down as much as you can and as safely as you can, because once you hit that gravel, it will spin you in the other direction, and that happened to a friend of his. Unfortunately, he survived, but on the way home from his shift, he swerved to avoid an animal on the road. No judgment here. Hit the gravel, and it spat him into the oncoming lane, and he was hit by another motorist. So truckers like it. It's good for motorists. It's good for cycling. Let's look at paving those shoulders, and the cost of lives and the benefit to the economy are pretty significant.
So you've partially answered, I guess, one of the final questions I have, Eleanor, which was, what's on your wish list? Share the Road's wish list over the next few years. That's one of them. Paved shoulders. Anything else?
I would say a return to a nonpartisan, fact based, evidence based, sensible conversation at Queen's Park, where we move away from people driving home points about cyclists and cycling that are untrue and damaging and hurtful, and away from that polarized conversation. Because someone said to me once, and this is a very human and very well known phrase, and I may get it wrong, so you guys will correct me. What is that saying about if you point a finger at someone, three are pointing back at you, right? So I don't even like
Something like
pointing fingers.
that.
Right? I worked for Prime Minister Chrétien as his press secretary, which was loads of fun. He's a great guy. I'm seeing him tomorrow. Actually, I'm very excited. I can't wait.
Cool.
He's a dynamic person and much loved. But he used to say that all the time. So maybe I got it from him. But when you point your finger at someone, three of them are pointing back at you. So please don't point fingers. It's untoward and unkind. It's also not helpful. It doesn't help us solve problems. If all I do is say, "Well, it's your fault." Well, wait a second. I thought we were trying to solve the problem together. Isn't that what we should do? Isn't that what people want? I'd like to see more of that, please. More solutions, more room for sensible, thoughtful solutions. Our bicycle friendly communities program that I talked about earlier, it's on our website, sharetheroad.ca, really says, 65% of Ontarians live in a bicycle friendly community now. Let's build on that together. Let's recognize that our municipal leaders want solutions. They don't want polarization, and they don't want dialogue that isn't helpful and doesn't respond to what people want. The data that we talked about earlier is clear. More people want to ride, 83% of them. That pent up demand is real. Those are people. Imagine if we unlock the potential of giving them that opportunity. So let's speak on the basis of facts and not fiction, and let's focus on solutions. That's what I hope we get back to. And in addition to some legislation that I talked about earlier, that I hope we're going to see in this session and again in the fall, because we have lots of work to do together, all of it important, and all of it really positive.
All right.
Wonderful. I know we're getting close to the end of our time here, Eleanor. So I guess one more thing I want to ask. You've
Sure.
mentioned it a few times, the bike summit in Windsor. Tell our listeners about it, why they should go, when it is, and everything you want them to hear.
Well, you're so kind. I will do that. May I just, as you've seen me do today, and thank you for giving me the runway. I'll talk a little bit about history. So I mentioned earlier that we had our first one in Waterloo in 2009. But one of the reasons that I wanted to do a bike summit was because I wanted to bring people together from all the different sides of the coin to talk in a positive, thoughtful, constructive, solutions-based way about cycling. And I, having attended the National Bike Summit in Washington, inspired by that, with legislators in attendance, by the way, because they need to hear from people, and people need to hear from them. So I thought, what a great idea! We should do this in Ontario. And I knew that there were mayors that were aching for solutions. Why? Because I would go to AMO and I'd talk to a mayor in Thunder Bay and I'd say, well, do you know that Kingston, Windsor, Ottawa, they're doing this kind of stuff, right? No, I had no idea. So I thought, what an opportunity. People should know what other folks are doing. And we should share, especially at the staff level, the engineers, the planners, the public works staff who are doing really good things. Let's share and inspire one another. And let's talk about the challenges we're having. And aren't those better tackled together? So that's what the Ontario Bike Summit does. It brings together everyone who's interested and who works at bicycle friendly communities in Ontario, whether it's from the economic tourism potential to road safety, our police officers, our advocates at the local level, to city councilors. And Windsor, we've met with a series of city councilors who are coming to the summit, engaged in the summit, and they want to hear from other municipalities so they can stand on the council and say, well, why can't we do this in Windsor? They're doing it in Kingston, Ottawa, Kingsville, Thunder Bay, and be able to really break through and do some of that myth busting and get to the solutions that we all want. So that's what the summit does. It's 2.5 days of, I think, interesting and thought-provoking conversation. And it's all about leaving inspired and informed. So people can go to our website, sharetheroad.ca, or OntarioBikeSummit.ca, and find all the information there. And we'd welcome them because it's an important time, as we've discussed today, I think, to be talking about cycling in Ontario.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're at the end of our time here today. Eleanor, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, to speak with our listeners at Good Roads. We also enjoyed your presentation at our conference earlier this month. I think we're going to have some representation at the Bike Summit, so glad to be there as well. Always be welcome. You're always welcome at Good Roads, and we hope to keep working with the folks that Share the Road. And best of luck with the summit. And to everyone at home, thanks for listening. And we'll have another episode coming to you shortly.